Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We can wait just a few minutes or just a minute or two to get everyone going in the meeting. I have a few housekeeping items to share. I want to first welcome all of you. I'm Emily Oglesby, the Deputy Communications Director at the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. We really appreciate all of you joining our monthly employment data release call today. So for housekeeping directions to assist with the flow of the call, please listen to the following. Everyone's phone line should be muted, and please turn your camera off. So everybody kind of take a look and see if your camera's going. We do that so that everyone has the opportunity to record Adrienne as she speaks. So please make sure your cameras are turned off and your microphones are muted. You should see and hear our team on the screen at all times. And we'll also do a screen share during Adrienne's presentation so that you have the ability to view it. Also, we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation from credentialed media. And in order for you to ask a question, if you'll please submit your question in the Teams chat, we'll get back to you with an answer. To find that, if you hover over the top right of your screen, you'll see a little chat option, and you can click that and type in your question. So we'll not be able to accept questions through a private chat, so please message us with this option. We will be able to answer as many questions as we can, and if your question isn't answered, you can email us at media@deo.myflorida.com, and we'll work with you to get an answer for you. We'll also provide this information in the chat so that you have our contact information if you need to call or contact us with additional questions. So today's presentation is focused on employment data for November 2020. Questions regarding reemployment assistance will not be addressed on this call and should be sent to media@deo.myflorida.com. So feel free to send your questions as the presentation progresses, and we'll get to share answers with you as soon as we can. So now I'm going to turn the call over to Adrienne Johnston, DEO's Chief Economist. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. At 10 a.m. this morning, the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity released November 2020 labor statistics for the state of Florida and its sub-state areas, including all metropolitan areas, counties, and large cities. These data were produced by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics through a federal state cooperative agreement with the Department of Economic Opportunity. All these data were collected through a combination of employer and household surveys, administrative records, and statistical modeling techniques. So this morning, as always, I'm going to walk through both the household and establishment surveys for you. So just bear with me one moment while I switch over and share my screen with you. All right, so as a reminder, the current population survey is used to estimate Florida's unemployment rate, total labor force, and labor force participation rate under the local area unemployment statistics program. Since these statistics are based on a survey of households, they capture information about individuals, not jobs, and they are calculated by place of residence, not place of work. Florida's November unemployment rate, I'm sorry, I've skipped ahead. So seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in November 2020 was 6.4%. This represented 651,000 jobless individuals out of a labor force of 10,146,000. Florida's November 2020 unemployment rate was equal to the revised October 2020 rate and up 3.6 percentage points from the November 2019 rate. Florida's November unemployment rate was lower than the national rate of 6.7%. The labor force was 10,146,000 in November 2020, down 277,000 from the November 2019 level. This was a decline of 2.7%. In November 2020, Osceola County had the highest unemployment rate of 9.7%, followed by Orange County with 8.1%. Wakulla County had the state's lowest unemployment rate at 3.9%, followed by St. Johns County with 4%. Job creation data for Florida is derived from the Current Employment Statistics, or CES survey, conducted by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The CES survey collects data from up to 20,000 Florida businesses and establishments each month to measure jobs by industry across the state. Since these statistics are based on a survey of employers, they measure counts of jobs, not individuals, and they capture characteristics of employers such as industry and place of work. Total non-agricultural employment grew to 8,588,200 jobs in November 2020. This was up 4,000 jobs, or less than 0.1% from October 2020. This figure is down 418,500 jobs from a year ago, an over-the-year decline of 4.6%. Focusing on Florida's private sector non-agricultural employment, this reached the level of 7,506,800 jobs in November 2020. This was up 9,800 jobs, or 0.1% from October 2020. Total private employment was down 372,800 jobs from November 2019. This is an over-the-year decline of 4.7%. 5 out of 10 major industry sectors in Florida gained jobs over the month. All major industries lost jobs over the year. Leisure and hospitality gained 11,800 jobs over the month. This was driven by 8,200 jobs gained in accommodation and food services. Education and health services added 3,100 jobs over the month. Construction and manufacturing each added 1,000 jobs over the month. The industries that lost the most jobs over the month were government, with 5,800 jobs, trade, transportation, and utilities, which lost 5,100 jobs, and information, which lost 1,700 jobs. The November 2020 seasonally adjusted local area data showed that 12 of the 24 major metro areas in Florida had over-the-month job gains. The Tampa metro area gained the most jobs with 6,400, and Homosassa Springs grew the fastest at a rate of 1%. Other metro areas gaining jobs over the month were Miami, Miami Beach, Kendall with 4,300 jobs, and Jacksonville with 3,100 jobs. And just as a reminder, we've compared the local area unemployment statistics employment levels versus the current employment statistics employment levels. And we saw that during the months of March and April, these two series became much closer to each other, largely driven by the fact that gig workers and self-employed are included in that blue line, the Laos employment number, and they were severely impacted by the pandemic. What we see now is that both series continue to grow and add jobs, and we're getting closer to the pre-pandemic relationship between the two series. So this is just something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on as things move forward. So moving away from the data released this morning with the local labor market statistics, I did want to highlight one other data series that we have recently published. This is our employment projections data. The 2020 to 2028 industry and occupational projections are now available on the employment projections page on floridainsight.org. The projection tables are available for the state and for each of the 24 local workforce development areas. To account for the impacts on employment due to COVID-19, the employment projections were enhanced using data from the Current Employment Statistics Survey. These effects are reflected in the 2020 employment estimates and result in higher employment growth rates in the industries and occupations which have been impacted most. This is a snapshot of what we see in the 2020 to 2028 top industries projected by growth. The performing arts and spectator sports industry is projected to have the fastest employment growth between 2020 and 2028 with a growth rate of 49.1%, followed by the accommodation and the amusement, gambling, and recreation industries. The food services and drinking places industry is projected to gain the most new jobs between 2020 and 2028 with 218,014 jobs, followed by the administrative and support services and the ambulatory healthcare services. Nurse practitioner's occupation is projected to have the fastest employment growth between 2020 and 2028 with a growth rate of 51.9%, followed by restaurant cooks and massage therapists. The combined food prep and serving workers occupation is projected to gain the most new jobs between 2020 and 2028, with 58,393 jobs. This is followed by waiters and waitresses and restaurant cooks. That concludes my remarks this morning, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you. So now we will open the floor for questions from any credentialed media. Please include your full name and media outlet. If you'll type your questions in the chat, the team chat if you scroll to the top of your screen, there's a little chat icon. If you click on it, you should be able to submit your questions. Any questions? Okay, Rob Weil, can you explain the difference between 41,000 jobs added in one line and 4,000 in another?
Rob, do you mind sharing which slide that was referring to? I want to make sure I'm addressing the right question.
I tell you what, Rob, we'll answer that question offline. We'll get back to you with an answer on that. So Joe Burns asks, how do the job projections relate to the recovery, hopefully next year?
It's a great question. So these are projections that we produce every year. They are looking long term. So the idea behind these projections are not necessarily to capture business cycles. They're really to look at long-term growth trends, and they're based on historical data typically. So this year we ran into a little bit of a challenge because we knew that our base year, which is 2020, was significantly impacted. So we had to do a little bit of work to revise those numbers and make sure that those numbers were reflective of where we actually stood in 2020. So when you think about these projections, think long term. We're talking about where we're going to be compared to today, 2020, in 8 years from now. So it doesn't necessarily give us a good picture of where we'll be next year. We could see any number of things happen next year, but still end up at that same end point that we're projecting 8 years from now. If you go back and compare to our previous projections, you'll notice that our end point is not significantly different from where we projected last year. And so that's the reason we're seeing very high growth rates at this point. So I hope that clarifies, but happy to answer any other questions about the projections too.
Okay, so Landon from CBS 4. Would you say we're on a good track to getting back to what was normal?
So I think that's a good question. It's a tough question to answer. Anytime you have significant changes in the economy, it takes a little bit of time to see what the structural effects are. The good news is we are seeing people come back into the labor market. So our labor force is growing. Businesses are creating jobs. So we are seeing things come back. We are seeing people engage in the labor market, which is what we want to see. But anytime there's a structural or potential for a structural shift, it takes a little bit of time to know and how that's going to have long-term impacts.
Okay. Bobby Calvin with the AP, how critical is wide acceptance of vaccines in the state's economic recovery?
So I don't know that I'm necessarily prepared to speak about that. There's a variety of factors that come into play. I think what we're seeing right now is businesses are already opening up. People are already engaging into the labor force, and so there are a lot of factors such as how, as we learn more about the particulars of this virus, then that could also lead to a difference in our recovery, regardless of the vaccine. So it certainly could play a large role, but we're already seeing things coming back to a large extent too. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what the impacts of that will be.
So Landon again from CBS 4, what types of everyday jobs are seeing the best projections for growth right now?
Good question. So since we know that jobs in industries such as leisure and hospitality and retail trade were significantly impacted earlier in 2020 by the pandemic, they had the largest decrease in jobs during the year of 2020, and so they're going to see the fastest growth rate. So on the surface, you'll look at those jobs and see very significant growth. When you look long term, kind of going back to what we projected last year, and you look at those endpoints, while we have this kind of temporary short-term impact on those jobs, what we've been projecting for those long-term projections for many years is that a lot of the healthcare-related occupations are where we see most of our growth. So registered nurses, anything related to the ambulatory healthcare services and doctors' offices and things like that. But certainly still have seen consistent growth in customer service representatives and retail trade related jobs as well.
Okay, so Roy O'Neill with iHeartRadio asks, how does our recovery compare to other states?
So we will actually get a better picture of that a little bit later today. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does release all states' data at the same time. So we will have a better idea once we have a chance to analyze that data, and we can certainly give you a high-level comparison later today. So we'll take that down as an action item and get that back to you. I can say in general, every state is dealing with the pandemic in different ways, and that certainly is going to impact how their economy recovers. So some states are still have businesses that are unable to open right now or have had to reclose, and so that's going to suppress their job growth numbers, certainly.
Okay, Joe Burns asks, do the numbers show that job growth has slowed or flattened, especially for Central Florida and tourism-related jobs?
So I think what we saw this month is the leisure and hospitality jobs are still growing significantly. So I wouldn't say that they've flattened at this point. Overall, across the state, we did see a little bit of slowness in November. Most of that is related to the fact that we're looking at seasonally adjusted data, and we did not hire as many seasonal jobs as we typically would in a given year. So a lot of that slowness was driven by the retail trade industry not adding as many jobs as we typically would at this time of the year.
Okay, Rob has a question. Some of the seasonally non-adjusted data shows that areas like Miami-Dade actually lost employment on the month. Can you say a bit more about the difference between seasonally adjusted and non-adjusted data?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this month we really see the impacts of the seasonal adjustments. So what we do with seasonal adjusted data is we're looking at how job gains or losses compare to the same point in time every year back in history. So if we know that like this time of year in November, we expect to see seasonal hiring, we want to kind of normalize for that. And we should have an expected amount of seasonal hiring every year. So what we're looking for is true growth beyond that kind of seasonal hiring pattern. So when we have significant deviations from that, it can actually show a decline in job growth, even though we actually added jobs over the month. So it can be a little bit confusing, but if you look at the non-seasonally adjusted data, what you're going to see is typically jobs were added, and then particularly statewide this month, but not at the same rate as we typically would in the month of November. So that actually shows a decline in some industries or in some areas.
Okay, we're going to do a last call for questions. So Landon with CBS4 again, can you explain the difference between CES and LUAs?
Absolutely. So this is the Current Employment Statistics Program. This is the CES is an establishment survey. So that means that we actually survey businesses and ask them about the number of individuals on payroll. So we're really talking about jobs when we talk about the Current Employment Statistics Survey. So it may be that we have, keep in mind, individuals might have multiple jobs, and so each of those jobs is going to be counted separately on this particular survey. We're also looking at where the business is, and we're looking at the industry of the business on the CES survey. For the LAUS, or Local Area Unemployment Statistics Program, this is based on a household survey. So this is where we actually go to individuals and ask them about their labor market participation. So it's based on where the individual lives. We're asking individuals if they're employed or if they're not employed. If they're employed, then they're counted in our employment number for local area unemployment statistics. In that case, they could be employed by a business, so they may actually show up on that establishment survey, or they may be self-employed and they wouldn't show up on that establishment survey. So that's kind of the key difference between the two, is that we might include people who are self-employed on the local area unemployment statistics, whereas we don't include that on the current employment statistics.
Okay, Joe has a question. Does a shift to jobs tied to online shopping show up in today's data?
So I think what we saw in today's data from November is that there was less hiring for seasonal jobs in the retail industry. So yes, I think we're seeing where people are shopping online a little bit more this season. Businesses did not add as many employees to their payrolls.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne. I appreciate all of you joining us on the call today. If you have any additional questions, you can email us again at media@deo.myflorida.com. That email address is also in the top of this chat thread. Please give us a call if you have any questions. We're happy to answer. We will see you guys next month. Thank you. Have a great one.